Hello, gentlemen, and welcome to another Palavi Market Research video. Today, we're going to be discussing the future of AI, but in the context of nuclear power, because it is becoming increasingly clear that there is now a massive supply-demand imbalance for electricity. So much so, in fact, that now big tech is starting a new race in parallel with the already existing race in AI. Because really, there are many contiguous races occurring that are interlinked with one another. Two we already kind of knew about: the race for the most advanced model, aka who has the best code base, and the race for the most compute, aka who has the most GPUs, hence NVIDIA's performance this past year. But the third race that I would argue is the most important of the three is actually raw energy production, because the models themselves have already become more and more open source. So it doesn't look like there will be a huge moat built around one single model. NVIDIA competitors are already starting to pop up all over the place. AMD just announced a legit competitive product, and more are coming. There are now endless businesses backed with infinite money whose sole purpose is to just eat into NVIDIA's existing profit margins, and this is happening globally. So access to GPUs, though it is a problem today, will not be a problem forever, probably not even 5 years from now. So what's next? When you have reliable access to GPUs and when everyone's code base is loosely the same, how do you win? I would argue it becomes an entirely a question of how much power you can plug into your model. And this isn't just for AI guys. Electricity demand to power AI is just one thing. But electric cars, these autonomous Tesla taxis, literally robots, are sending the demand for electricity to levels I don't think anyone was foreseeing. This is why we are now seeing Google, Sam Altman, and others making deals with modular nuclear startups. This is something I've done a tremendous amount of research on in the past. So it's important to mention that one of the most important bipartisan proposals the Department of Energy has made over the past 10 years is something called coal to nuclear. It's basically the idea that you place nuclear power plants on retired coal plants, which we have over 300 of, by the way. You can use the existing infrastructure on site to save for massive costs. So you're building on top of an environmentally corrupt place already, anyways, and there are infinite reasons why this is just a great idea. And when this study first came out in 2022, my contacts in DC were blowing up my phone because I've spoken on many occasions at events and elsewhere about the future of nuclear. So, right now, let's do a brief overview on this, because what we see happening with Sam Altman's stake in Oklo or Google's investment into Kairos Power is a little misleading, because these businesses remain mostly in a theoretical stage. And that isn't even getting into the fact that these companies have to then get an approval from a US regulator to actually build these things. So allow me to break this all down for you by first explaining to you a brief history of nuclear reactors, and then I'll get into what problems these companies need to solve in order to make super safe modular reactors possible. So guys, let's think in first principles. If I'm a human man looking to build a nuclear power plant in, say, the 1950s, what do I do? How do I do it? Well, I go look for what type of nuclear systems are currently being manufactured at scale. Why? Because if we have any hope of making any money, we have to piggyback on an existing manufacturing process. Back then, there were only two options, and both options came from the government for obvious reasons. The government scaled the manufacturing process of nuclear bombs and nuclear engines for submarines. So I know what you're probably thinking: Nick, are you about to tell me that all of the nuclear energy systems that we had problems with in the 20th century were just giant, highly pressurized submarine engines that are literally designed to withstand huge amounts of pressure from going underwater? Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. The first generation of nuclear energy, aka pressurized water reactors, just came from mimicking the design of a nuclear submarine engine, because they were really just mimicking the manufacturing methodology, because after all, manufacturing is the hard part. But not only that, the government actually trained a large number of engineers to build, maintain, and operate nuclear systems with that design. So that inventory of engineers and manufacturing, blah, blah, you get it. That is why all the reactors were so insanely pressurized. They were designed to go miles under the ocean. So let me tell you how the next generation of these nuclear systems will work. Because all of these cute startups like Oklo and Kairos will tell you that they have their own unique thing going on. But it's just all little variations of what are called molten salt reactors. But first, before we get into that, let's break down how a pressurized water reactor works. Basically, you get giant uranium rods. You get them really, really hot. When the uranium gets hot enough, the uranium atoms split. And that atom splitting from the uranium is what produces nuclear fission. To cool down these rods, they use water, and that water is used when it turns into steam to power a generator, as you'll see here. And that is where the electricity is generated. A molten salt reactor does things differently. Instead of using solid fuel rods, it dissolves nuclear fuel, like uranium or thorium, into a hot liquid salt mixture thing. This salt stays liquid at really high temperatures, like over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The molten salt carries both the nuclear fuel and acts as a coolant to move the heat away from the reactor core that heats the fuel. This design is great because if these molten salts get too hot, you can just drain them instantaneously into these dump tanks, right? So where you're basically separating the heating source from the radioactive substance itself. So let's take a second. Let's back up for a second. Why do these molten salt reactors not work right now? Well, you see these holes like that wrap the reactor? These holes that store this crazy liquid salt shit I just described, well, these holes need to be able to handle that. It needs to be able to handle intense corrosion for like a decade at a time, right? So like it needs to be able to exist and work for a while. To my knowledge, we do not have that material accessible in a commercial context yet, meaning it doesn't exist in a cost-effective manner right now because it hasn't been manufactured at scale yet. This is a huge problem for all hard mechanical or industrial engineering domains like nuclear or space. We have materials we have invented, but we have not invented the methodology for how to manufacture that material at scale in a factory in a way that is profitable for someone to do so. This is something engineers understand very well. So there is a giant ocean right now between inventing a material and then doing what I just described, the ability to make that material in a factory in a profitable way. This race will only have one, two, or maybe three winners, this race for AI. But one thing is for sure, whoever wants to live in this world full of advanced AI, robots, robotaxis, etc., will need to create the energy to do so. And this is especially difficult because the demand is mostly going to stem from our urban centers. That is why nuclear, specifically these modular reactors, are the only game in town. For context, Oklo, the business I mentioned earlier that Sam Altman is a chairman of, has been trying to build a reactor in Idaho that sits on a footprint slightly below 5,000 square feet. They claim, and I believe them, that it will be able to power roughly 12,000 single family homes. That, from my background in like real estate and development and stuff, is a huge deal. Imagine I can build a skyscraper in Manhattan. I build a highly secure basement underneath the building, and I put two of these reactors in there with 10,000 square feet. I now sell energy to the entire block and then some. I know it seems insane, like to think that people will live and literally live on top of nuclear reactors, but I think that's the future we're bound to create, guys. The demand for electricity is simply too high in urban centers, and the safety of these systems will be profoundly better than we are currently anticipating them to be. So, as a community, let's do our best to track these material businesses that may be responsible for manufacturing the hulls for these modular systems. That could be like the NVIDIA play for this small modular reactor sector. Thanks for listening, guys. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Let's go.